Well, the election's coming up. I guess we should talk about for whom you should vote. Generally, I'd say if you're left-wing, vote Green, if you're right-wing, vote Reform, and do not, under any circumstance, vote for Labour, or the Conservatives, or the Lib Dems, because all three of those parties just represent the interests of the establishment elite. Labour are 110% going to go to bat for the establishment elite, so are the Conservatives, and the Lib Dems pride themselves on being the centrist party. Well, if you're in the centre between two parties that both just want to represent the interests of the establishment elite, then you are simply 1/3 of an establishment triopoly. Of course, you might have other options where you are. There are minor parties in the UK that do not stand candidates in every constituency. If you have the option of voting for the Party of Women, I don't think that would be a bad move. Obviously, I don't think they're that likely to win any constituencies, but the kind of good news about this election is that there's no such thing as a wasted vote because there isn't any vote worth casting to waste. I personally wouldn't vote for the Party of Women even if I had the option, because even though the main focus of my channel is quite singularly on trans identity, it's not something that actually concerns me that much as far as electoral politics is concerned. I don't think the gender critical movement is well served by getting concerned with electoral politics. I think it's better served by changing people's minds on the ground level, and I don't think this should be an issue that changes from election to election, which it will be if we all decide that the only way to progress is just to vote for the right party, because what happens when that party doesn't win? I think the main problem for the gender critical movement is that criticism of trans identity is often associated with the conservative right, so I'd say more important than voting for gender critical candidates is making sure that gender critical candidates represent the reality of the actually bipartisan nature of opposition to trans identity. With this said, I'd argue maybe the most useful gender critical vote would be for George Galloway's Workers' Party, or the Social Democratic Party, or the Communist Party of Britain, as recently endorsed by J.K. Rowling. Of course, none of these parties are perfect in general, and not on the trans issue either. They all have at some point flip-flopped on this issue or expressed inconsistency. However, they do also all have within them some candidates like me, people who started from left-wing progressive principles and realized that opposition to trans identity is consistent with those principles. I would of course contrast this with Keir Starmer's Labour, because they have expressed some opposition to trans identity, but they're also moving conspicuously to the right on all sorts of issues. So if the goal is to make it clear to people that you can be on the left and be opposed to trans identity, which is what people have to realize in order for this to not become an issue that becomes subject to the whims of electoral politics, then voting for a party that has moved to the right and become more critical of trans identity would, if anything, just reinforce the idea that only backwards regressive conservatives actually have any objections to trans ideology. Unfortunately, basically every party is kind of wishy-washy on trans identity. In the case of the Communist Party, for example, I imagine there are some people in the Communist Party who actually understand Marxist materialism and recognize trans identity is not consistent with that, but there are also going to be some other people who just vaguely know about communism and kind of agree with it, but they also get easily suckered in by the idea that what communism is really about is opposing cis heteronormative patriarchal neo-colonialism and white supremacy and stuff, and other identity politics issues. There is a Communist Party that is much more explicitly and consistently against trans identity, and that is the Communist Party of Great Britain, as opposed to just the Communist Party of Britain, although even then I think there are multiple Communist Parties of Britain and Communist Parties of Great Britain in the UK, but I think the party I'm describing is the most prominent Communist Party of Great Britain. So if J.K. Rowling wanted to do something really funny and something really productive, it would be to actually fund the CPGB so that it became the major Communist Party, eclipsing the Communist Party of Britain, and eventually became the go-to left-wing protest vote against the establishment elite. Because, of course, then you would have a party that would appeal to the progressive left, who are generally the ones who endorse trans identity, but it would be a party that is quite consistently and explicitly, like I say, anti-trans identity. Right now, I like the Communist Party of Britain and the Workers' Party, and to a lesser extent the Social Democratic Party, but in all those cases, I wouldn't be that surprised, certainly not surprised enough to be particularly disappointed if I saw these parties flip-flopping on this issue at some point. Especially with this being an issue that is filled with buzzwords for both sides that mean that a lot of people say things that sound very significant, but actually don't seem to involve them doing anything significant to change things. For example, the Conservative Party have been making a big deal about the fact they know what a woman is, with the implication being that they know that a woman is an adult human female, except they've been in charge 14 years, and the Gender Recognition Act, which explicitly says by law that in fact a woman is not necessarily an adult human female, is still here. So they'll get a round of applause from idiots for saying, we know what a woman is, a woman's an adult human female, but then they have laws on the books, and they've had them there for the last 14 years, and they haven't changed them. So the true gender critical vote is, I think, a bit nebulous. I would say that it's probably best in terms of long-term productive achievement to vote for whatever left-wing party there is in your area. Again, left-wing, so not Labour or the Lib Dems, that is, at least in some discernible sense, critical of trans identity or appears to be tolerant of that, if you have that option, because again, that will make it clear to people that you can be on the progressive left and opposed to trans identity. And like I say, when everybody realizes that, and trans identity cannot just claim, well, you have to support us because, you know, if you're going to be a member of the progressive left, you need to support trans identity, otherwise you're a bigot. As soon as they can't claim that, they lose. But like I say, this will only be half a job, because even if you did vote for the Communist Party or the Workers' Party, there is no guarantee that they wouldn't at some point, like I say, flip-flop on this issue. So we're all just going to have to wait for J.K. Rowling to assume her role as the principal donor and sponsor for the Communist Party of Great Britain to bring about a reign of true Marxist materialism upon this fair country. But if you have the option of voting for the Party of Women, then by all means do. My only concern is that, like I say, a lot of politicians seem to be engaging with this issue with empty platitudes, so I kind of worry that even if they see that they're losing significant numbers of votes to the women who place this as a very important issue and are willing to kind of single-issuedly vote on this point, they'll say, well, you know what we need to do? We need to do even more empty platitudes. So you'll have even more Conservative politicians and even Labour politicians, so I say even, again, they're basically the same party at this point, saying a woman is an adult human female, and they'll think to themselves that will win over the party of women supporters. But then, of course, they're not actually going to offer any substantial change that would help the gender-critical movement. And the problem is, you could say, well, I'll just keep voting for the Party of Women until they get the message that these empty platitudes aren't going to satisfy that. The problem with that is you're relying on politicians being very perceptive there, which I would not necessarily suggest the majority of them are, so it's quite likely it would take them a while to actually put together the logic of, oh, okay, so lots of people are voting for this other Party of Women party that's explicitly gender critical, therefore we need to offer up actually explicitly gender critical policies. I don't think they're going to put that together quick enough, and of course every single year that goes by where we're not making significant progress on this issue, all sorts of horrible things are happening to children, to women, to gender non-conforming people. So I think, considering that elections happen only every 5 years, that's the limitation of electoral politics there. I will say one quick thing about the Party of Women while I'm on the subject. Remember when there was the initial kind of process of getting the Party of Women verified as an official party, and it was rejected, I think twice, maybe 3 times, for issues with the paperwork. And apparently this is not uncommon, like the paperwork to start a party is, I guess, kind of complicated, and people don't always get it right. And there's lots of applications that I'm sure people do where you put together the paperwork and then you find out that actually there was some mistake. But the TRAs were celebrating it like, ha, look, someone saying, adult human loser, Posey Parker or kellie-jay Keane, her party has failed, that it's been rejected by the Electoral Commission. Even people who should have been aware of the reason why it was rejected, which was, of course, because of a paperwork issue. And it was just really funny to me that these people were completely unable to project their minds forward and realize that, well, eventually she's going to just solve the paperwork issue and the party's going to be there. So it just seems weird to have this massive like celebration and kind of this gloating about the fact that very temporarily the party was kind of, facing some issues in terms of getting accepted by the Electoral Commission, when anybody who knew anything could have told you, well, eventually it's going to get through. And again, a lot of them didn't even seem to deny that eventually it was going to get through. They just thought it was so fantastically hilarious that it had temporarily faced a pretty minor speed bump. Unfortunately, I think these are the same types of people who are going to make a big deal out of the fact that in the grand scheme of things, the Party of Women probably isn't going to get that many votes, which is just annoying because obviously there's lots of legitimate causes that might not get that many votes. At the end of the day, morality isn't a popularity contest, so I don't think it matters. It's just going to be vaguely annoying to see some people act as if it's some massive victory that this party that even kellie-jay Keen, I think, has admitted it's probably not going to get that many votes. It's just there to give a voice to the women for whom this is a massive concern, that it's not going to do very well. Of course, I will say though, absolutely, if there was any election to vote for the Party of Women, this would be it, because like I say, in this election, there absolutely is not any such thing as a wasted vote. Of course, like I say, I don't really care about the gender critical issue too much within the context of this election, as you can probably infer by the fact that I've said that I'm left wing, and I've said if you're left wing you should probably vote Green. Spoiler alert, I will almost certainly be voting for the Green Party, and the Green Party are probably about as far away from me as any party could be on the trans issue, with the possible exception of the Lib Dems. I think the Lib Dems are maybe the very worst party on the trans issue. As I've said, the three parties that have anything close to a chance of winning are all backed by and in turn backing the establishment elite, which is why I make a very firm point of saying, do not vote for these parties that want to destroy this country. Do not vote Labour. Do not vote Tory. Do not vote Lib Dem. The next two biggest parties would be Green and Reform. One party on the left, one party on the right. If you're on the right, then by all means vote Reform. I think that makes sense. I think that for the most part, if you have conservative principles, the Conservative Party have not really represented what I think should be good, legitimate conservative principles, so I can understand such a person who holds those principles voting Reform. I am more so on the left, so that's why I will be voting Green. And while I'm on this topic, I'd also like to say that I come out fully, wholeheartedly in support of Just Stop Oil. It's not necessarily that I fully agree with their cause, although I think I do. It's more just that I like that they are vandalizing important parts of British heritage, because, screw our heritage, right? We're letting people in this country starve or die from curable diseases, and we aren't willing to actually have policies that will reduce the cost of living and increase the amount of money we have to invest in our public services. There's a point where you have to be like Elijah, who just prayed for his country to fail because he recognized that his country was choosing to fail, was choosing to destroy itself. What are we as a collective doing in voting for these scumbags, if not choosing for our country to fail? Now, I'm not voting for these people, and hopefully you're not. Hopefully you're not one of the 70% of people, according to polls, who say they're going to vote for Labour, the Conservatives, or the Tories. But 70% is a significant number. That's 70% of people who do not want any kind of major shake-up in politics. They want to continue voting for the same single political establishment that is destroying this country. But they don't want any shake-up in politics, which means they don't fundamentally want to change what we're doing and change what's happening in this country. And considering that what is happening in this country right now is decline and failure, that's 70% of the population saying, we want more failure, we want more decline, we want more destruction. So when I see protesters trashing streets, trashing shops, trashing cars, delaying people on the train, destroying important parts of British heritage, priceless paintings, Stonehenge. I mean, they don't destroy them, to be fair, they just vandalize them in ways that ultimately aren't permanent. But even if they did vandalize them in ways that are permanent, how can I claim that we as a collective country, and our heritage is tied up in us as a collective country, how can I claim we don't deserve that? It took me a while to get that one joke from The Simpsons.
It's a two-party system. You have to vote for one of us.
He's right. This is a two-party system.
Well, I believe I'll vote for a third-party candidate.
Go ahead. Throw your vote away.
When I was a kid, I assumed this meant that the US had a system where you could only vote for two people, but you could vote for there to be a third person. But if you voted for there to be a third person, then you wouldn't be able to then vote in the subsequent election where that third person would participate. So that's why you were throwing your vote away, because you'd vote for the third person, but then you wouldn't have that vote at a subsequent point. Of course, now as an adult, I realize the joke is supposed to be that people don't think that third-party candidates have a chance of winning, and that's why they will be throwing their vote away. And of course, obviously the reason this is a joke is because it's an exaggeration, it's extreme, it's unrealistic, it's not something that could actually happen, right? I mean, if there were just two politicians who were completely evil, completely committed to only serving themselves and maybe their elite friends, but ultimately destroying the country and basically subjugating it, people would realize that even a candidate from a party that's not typically very popular would be worth voting for. And even if they didn't think that candidate had any chance of winning, they'd still recognize it's worth voting for that candidate just so you're not voting for a candidate that is in fact pretty obviously evil. But no, at this point, I don't think that's a joke. I genuinely think, literally, if it was revealed that Starmer and Sunak were aliens who were intent on enslaving humanity, people would vote for them. I mean, when you really think about it, how different is that from what's the case right now when people are voting for them? I don't really understand people who are planning to vote Labour. Their logic seems to be that we need to punish the Tories, but what they don't seem to understand is that the Tories and Labour aren't enemies. That's not the actual divide. The real animosity is between the country and the elites. In 2017 and 2019, Jeremy Corbyn was a candidate who actually stood for the people of this country against the interests of the establishment elite. And I'm not even going to say that I agree with his personality. I think he was very weak as a leader, and I think that significantly counts against him. And I think he's continued to be weak in a lot of his conduct. I think the way that he has basically rolled over to the horrible way he's been treated shows how weak he is. I also don't completely agree with all of his policies on everything, but the fact that he was for the country and against the elite can be singularly proven in the fact that the establishment very clearly, every single level of the establishment, desperately did not want him to get elected. Like, seriously, regardless of your opinion on Corbyn's policies or personality, there should have just been one litmus test for deciding, at least in hindsight, whether or not he would have been a good person to have in charge of this country, and that is the fact that clearly the establishment elite desperately did not want him to get near power. They were absolutely desperate to avoid that. And that proves, in and of itself, alone, that is sufficient proof that he would have been certainly better than the vast majority of prime ministers we've had that, of course, the establishment elite have signed off on. So the establishment elite didn't want to risk somebody like Corbyn getting in charge again, and that's why we've ended up with a Labour Party that have been completely captured by the establishment. The establishment wants you to believe you have a choice, and the way to do that is to have two parties that both just serve the interests of the elite and want to destroy this country, and give you the false choice between these two. So if you say, I'm going to vote for Labour because I want to stick it to the Tories, you are just admitting to the establishment, to the elites, that you are a dupe. Everybody voting for Labour instead of the Tories is just telling the establishment, you're basically begging the establishment to just walk all over you by saying that you'll accept any nonsense, any lie, any manipulation that they try to impose on you. Keir Starmer is probably going to win the next election in potentially a landslide. That's quite a likely outcome, even though most people do not like him. He's not very popular. Nobody trusts him. Everybody recognizes that he is a liar, that he is just the most dishonest politician ever, really. But they're still going to vote for him anyway to teach the Tories a lesson. But you gotta think about the other lesson you're teaching here, which is the lesson that you would be teaching to the establishment, which is that you will eat slop. They can serve you up the most disgusting, immoral, dishonest politician who, like, I've ever seen. Like, I've never seen a politician just lie so consistently on every single point, be so disingenuous and every single, so cynical with every single thing he's done. And you're going to say, well, don't worry, elite, I'll gleefully chow down on that. I'll vote for him. More slop, please. That's the lesson. And you'll say, oh, I'm teaching the Tories a lesson. Okay, but think about the people who actually control the country and the lesson you're teaching them if you accept this. Honestly, like, the lack of second order thinking here is insane. Because even if Labour do get in charge, they'll have this incredibly unpopular politician. So basically all you're going to get is slowly moving things further in the direction of the Tories anyway, because Labour right now have moved in the direction of the Tories, which apparently is the people who the Labour voters want to punish. But then Labour is going to be moving towards the Tories. So if Labour's then unpopular and things don't go well for them, then the Tories, who will now be like over here because Labour's moved to the right, so the Tories are probably going to move to the right, are going to potentially win the next election, meaning you're just pushing things further in the direction of where the Tories wanted to go in the first place in order to punish the Tories. Starmer has lied on basically everything. Like, take anything he said, you will find evidence that he has lied on that he's been inconsistent on that. I genuinely don't think he actually believes anything, and whatever he does believe, if he does believe anything, must be terrifying, because you wouldn't need to lie this much unless what you actually believe is like the most evil thing in the world, such that you need to lie constantly and never actually just say what you sincerely believe. And he lies in a way that almost seems like he can't even engage with the expectation of truth or honesty or what he's saying making sense. Like, at one point he was asked about the fact that he'd flip-flopped on how the government was going to get revenue. And he was saying, well, we just can't afford to pursue this policy that would get us revenue. And then, of course, it was pointed out, Keir, revenue, how you get revenue, that increases the amount of money you have. Like, I can understand you saying you can't afford spending, but you're saying you can't afford to collect revenue. That doesn't make any sense. And he just said, well, we can't afford it. We just can't afford to collect the revenue. And it's like, that doesn't make any sense. But he just kept repeating it. So it's not just lying, it's being told directly that what he's saying is at odds with just reality and logic and common sense, and just continuing to say it. He also has an insane ego. There are examples of him basically kicking out or otherwise hampering the efforts of Labour politicians because they're doing really well and they're more popular than him. There was a recent example, a politician who was standing against Nigel Farage in Nigel Farage's seat, and he was proving really popular. But then he was, I think, moved to a different constituency. I might be wrong about that. Maybe they just threatened it. But there's been some leaks that show the reason why is because Keir Starmer was annoyed that this other politician was more popular than him. He also has engaged in the most conspicuous, insanely conspicuous factional purge ever. Not ever, but, you know, just this, anybody who disagrees with him on anything, anybody who looks like they might present any sort of political threat to him, he's just gotten rid of them with bogus, trumped up charges of whatever. He also has a consistent record of taking freebies, corporate freebies for things. There's, I think, a study that shows that, or like a study, some kind of metric that shows that he's actually taken more in terms of freebies than like any other politician in the UK right now. So freebies like being flown off to exotic locations, or, you know, getting all sorts of expensive, nice perks. You know, just the kind of the things that a man of the people would do. Just accept all of these freebies, all this like corporate wealth being thrown at him from these corporations. Just the kind of thing that really makes you trust a politician. And of course, he's also flip-flopped all over the place on the trans issue. Again, I don't know how anyone could possibly trust anything. Like, if you care about the trans issue, how can you vote for someone who, just on this specific issue alone, has been all over the place? And the thing is, he says, again, it's that thing of not even engaging with just the idea of the expectation of truth, because he recently said that he doesn't think trans women should have the right to use women's toilets. Now, I'm just going to go out on a limb here and say that I don't think we are going to see the like enforced protection of women's spaces under Keir Starmer. But I think that's just him saying something, because like that would be a more extreme policy than the Conservatives. Like, under the Conservatives, biological males were walking into women's toilets all the time, and it was legal for them to do that. But Keir just says, oh no, I don't think they should have that right. But again, it's one of those things where you can't possibly believe that he, the most milquetoast, just boring, like unprincipled politician who doesn't seem to have any clear like motivations or idea about actually how to improve the country or pursue any kind of goals, you can't possibly believe that he's actually going to follow through on that. No, he just says things because, he's put on the spot or whatever, or he just compulsively lies. But there's no way I don't know what his specific policies on the trans issue are, but there's no way he's got some specific policies that would cohere with him having just said that trans-identified males do not have a right to use women's toilets. There's no way he's following through on that. Zero. And there's no way he's following through. There's no way Keir Starmer getting elected is going to see women's spaces be protected in that way. No chance. Also, just on the subject of him being a party leader, he might end up getting fewer votes than Jeremy Corbyn, who's the guy who he's supposed to be replacing. Jeremy Corbyn in 2017 got exactly bang on 40% of people voting for him. Keir Starmer, most polls put him getting slightly less than that, and I think he'll get even less than predicted because nobody is actually enthused by him. I think a lot of people, when it actually comes to election day, they're not going to be bothered to show up. Because, there's a difference between saying, oh yeah, I guess I'll vote for Keir Starmer, and actually thinking, am I really going to vote for this slimy slime ball? No. With this said, Corbyn obviously didn't do very well in the 2019 election. The reason for that is because the 2019 election was mostly about Brexit, and basically Labour's policy on Brexit, I actually think it was a pretty sensible policy. Their policy was to go and negotiate with the EU on the best deal they could come up with. That's what they were saying. And then they were saying they were going to present that deal to the British public and have a referendum on that deal. Because, of course, in 2016, just the nebulous idea of Brexit was being voted on, but it wasn't clear what Brexit meant. So Labour was saying, well, what we'll do is we'll actually, we'll say, okay, they voted for Brexit, so we will try to come up with an idea of Brexit that we think would be best for this country. But then, because nobody necessarily voted for our specific idea of Brexit, we will then present that deal to the public and have a referendum on whether or not the public wants to accept that specific deal. That was basically their policy. And like I say, I think there's a logic to it. However, there were a few issues with it. Firstly, it's kind of complicated to explain. Secondly, it's sort of a bit of a middling policy, such that both Remainers and Brexiters kind of had reasons to be suspicious of it. Remainers would be like, well, okay, so does that mean you're like a Brexit party because you're going to try to come up with a good deal for Brexit? You're going to try to make Brexit work? And of course, the Brexiters would be like, oh, so you're probably just going to come up with a terrible deal that nobody's going to vote for and then claim that nobody wants Brexit and back out. So, both parties or both kind of points of view had reasons to be suspicious of it. And then finally, of course, suggesting another referendum when we just had 5 years of 4 major elections: general election 2015, Brexit referendum 2016, general election 2017, and a general election in 2019. To suggest another referendum on top of that was unlikely to be very popular. So, yes, Jeremy Corbyn lost the 2019 election because his policies on Brexit were not very appealing. Boris Johnson made Brexit a big deal. 2019 election, pretty much anybody who knows anything will tell you that the 2019 election was about Brexit and Labour lost. But here's a question. Do you know who was really in charge of Labour's 2019 Brexit policy? Do you know who was the shadow Brexit minister for Labour? Keir Starmer. So Keir Starmer has already lost an election. He's kind of saying I'm moving past the failures of Corbyn. But Corbyn in 2017 got 40% of the vote, probably more than Keir Starmer will ever get. 40% of people are never going to vote for Keir Starmer. The only time Corbyn did badly was in a referendum or an election that was largely about Brexit, where Keir Starmer was the one in charge of Brexit. So he's clearly just a useless, incompetent person, and he lies about it. He makes this massive mistake with this Brexit policy that people do not want, and he, rather than taking accountability for that, he's saying, oh, I'm going to move past the failures of the person before me, when he was the one in charge of the main policy that people didn't like from Labour in the election where they did badly. I've generally defended the UK political culture regarding the absence of a codified constitution. In the UK, technically speaking, the Prime Minister has absolute power. The monarch defers all of their powers to the Prime Minister, and also cabinet ministers and members of parliament can be basically gotten rid of, fired, kicked out, if they refuse to vote the way the Prime Minister wants them to. So technically speaking, the Prime Minister has the right to propose any piece of legislation and basically demand that their entire party votes that through. So, technically speaking, legally, the Prime Minister has the righteous authority, the legitimate authority, to outlaw elections themselves, to turn the UK into a dictatorship. Now, in the US, they have this codified constitution, and they have all these elaborate checks and balances to make sure that that can't happen, to make sure there's like a law above the person who's in charge. And I think that's crap. Firstly, because I think having these checks and balances, it means that you can't hold people responsible enough. In the UK, because the Prime Minister has absolute power, that means the buck of responsibility stops at the Prime Minister. Whereas in the US, everyone can say, oh no, it wasn't me, checks and balances. It's like, I just couldn't do it. It was that person was in charge, There's no clear place where the buck of responsibility should stop, because everybody's checking everyone else's power. Everyone can claim, well, I didn't really have the ability to fix things. But the other issue is, as soon as you put in like laws, specific laws to try to solve a problem and to kind of limit people's power and, make it so somebody doesn't have absolute authority, people are going to try to break those laws. That's the problem of any kind of codified law. People will find loopholes. And if you look at US history, there's so many examples of just the most absurd, annoying loopholes that people have come up with. And then you compare that to the UK, where people don't need to find loopholes, right? Because what would they be finding loopholes in? There is no codified constitution above them that they need to find loopholes in. They can just, if they want to change the law, they can. So what the UK instead relies on is just the fact that because the Prime Minister will have this power, somehow it will just work out that, just naturally, the Prime Minister's not going to abuse that power. Just in a way, it kind of is held together with hope and just faith in the idea that people will have some sense of shame, some sense of integrity, such that they're not going to abuse this power, that they do have the technical authority to do whatever they want with. And the UK is not really that much less free than all the other democratic countries in the world, not substantially or obviously so in any broad sense. Obviously, you can maybe point to a few areas where things could be different, where we could have more freedom, but in general, there's not an obvious sense in which, there's clear freedoms that we're lacking that can be directly traced back to the absence of a codified constitution. So it would seem like having a system where the Prime Minister can do whatever they want and we just trust that somehow this will work out has actually worked pretty well. And in many ways, at least if nothing else, left us without having to deal with all these annoying people trying to find these loopholes in the system as you get in the United States, which means at least our system is a little bit more honest in that regard, because it's not pretending that we've got this perfect system that holds everything in place when all it really does is give an excuse for scummy people to try to find holes in the system. With Starmer, though, I'm not sure if I actually continue to have that faith that things will work out. He's so scummy. He's so dishonest. Everything about him just gives off the worst possible vibes. And I can't imagine him feeling any sense that he should actually be constrained by anything human. Like anything that should be to a human being that should make them stop and think, oh, I shouldn't be doing this thing. It just doesn't seem like he has that. When you look at the way he talks, when you look at the way he's behaved. One of Starmer's big things has been saying that he's changed the Labour Party. He talks about that so much. It's just a broken record. I've changed the Labour Party, which is absolutely a bizarre thing to say. Just on the record, it's a bizarre thing to say because, like I say, 40% of people in 2017 voted for the Labour Party. Yes, 2019 wasn't so good. I don't know what they got there. I think it was in the 30s, but still about 1/3 of the population. 1/3 of people were yeah, I like the Labour Party. Seems like a pretty good deal to me. But he's making a big deal. And again, 30% of people, and this was at a point where you didn't have, because obviously you've got to bear in mind that since then we've had the terrible handling of COVID, we've had Liz Truss completely crashing the economy, and Rishi Sunak, I think, to be fair, I will say, to give credit to Rishi Sunak, I don't know if he necessarily did a bad job during his time as Prime Minister. I think by the time that we'd had COVID and then Liz Truss pretty much immediately crashed the economy in the shortest term as Prime Minister ever, at that point there was really no chance for Rishi. But still, all these terrible things have happened. This was before then. Corbyn was still doing pretty well in opposition to them. But Keir Starmer is making a big deal out saying, I've changed the Labour Party. And he even said things. He said things like, if you don't like the way I've changed the Labour Party, leave. Don't vote for me. And I don't get that, because it's like, if you're one of the, let's even take 2019. If you're one of the 1/3 of people in the UK who voted Labour in the previous election, who thought, yeah, I like Labour, and then you have Keir Starmer saying, I've completely changed this party. It's a completely different party. It's unrecognisable. I don't understand how you can say that you're going to vote for a party that is unrecognisable from the party that you voted for 5 years ago. Like, that doesn't make any sense to me. And the weird thing is, like I say, the Conservatives, they crashed the economy. They mismanaged COVID, and apart from anything else, the real thing is that while they introduced all these lockdown rules, they themselves didn't obey them. They were having parties in number 10, which some people, by the way, say is not a big deal. They've been like, well, surely the policy thing. No, telling everybody that they need to stay inside, basically shutting down a lot of people's lives for a whole year because of the COVID thing, and then they themselves don't follow those rules, that is a really bad thing to do as far as I'm concerned. That was terrible. But Keir Starmer, he's not making a big deal out of the fact he's nothing like the Conservative Party. He's not saying, I'm nothing like this party that crashed the economy. I'm nothing like this party that kind of destroyed a lot of people's lives with lockdown and then didn't even follow the rules themselves. I'm nothing like this party that has been in charge for 14 years and has sold us a completely bogus doctrine of austerity, which basically says what we're going to do is we're going to invest less in society, invest less in the country, just give more money to the super rich. Wow, what a shock. Turns out that actually doesn't work for most people. He's not saying he's different from them. Indeed, of course, we know he's not different from them. We know that pretty much everything bad about the Conservative Party, Starmer would do exactly the same. On austerity, he's admitted he'll do exactly the same. He doesn't have the option of being a hypocrite on things like COVID lockdowns, but I guarantee if he did have the option, if he was in charge then, he absolutely would have been doing all the same hypocritical things. So he's not saying he's nothing like the Conservative Party who've done all these terrible things. He's making a big deal anytime he gets up. It's like a catchphrase. At this point, it's barely even, you can't even call it the Labour Party anymore, right? It's not Keir Starmer's Labour Party, it's Keir Starmer's changed Labour Party. That's what he calls it, the changed Labour Party. It's a changed Labour Party. So it's different. It's not different from the Conservatives. It's different from in 2017 when it was supported by 40% of people. 2019, still 1/3 of people supporting it. Would have been more if it wasn't for Keir Starmer's bad policies on the European Union. And a party that ultimately, if nothing else, the establishment elite hated. A party that Jeremy Corbyn said the first thing he'd do when he got into office, homelessness would end. He would commit himself to ending homelessness. Now, how would he have done that? Would he have been actually able to do it? I don't know. Like I say, I'm not like a massive fan of Jeremy Corbyn as a person. I'm not going to claim I think he just exuded competence. I don't think he did, but I think he was probably a good person and he certainly would have tried his best to put the people of this country first. I think, honestly, he probably would have got embroiled in the weeds because even though he'd be in charge, there'd still be all sorts of establishment elites on the outside. I think it probably, like, I'm not going to sit here and say, like, everything would be perfect if 2017 or 2019 had gone different. No, I don't think so. But the reality is that I think this was still a politician who seemed to care about the people of this country, and Keir Starmer's making a big deal out of the fact he's nothing like that. And of course, all of this leads to the one big thing, the hilarious thing and frustrating thing about Keir Starmer, which is a lot of people are going to vote for him because they're thinking he's lying. Well, that's it. Because if you know anything about Keir Starmer, you're voting for him knowing he's a liar. Because if you know two things about Keir Starmer, you know he's a liar. Because chances are that the one thing you know is one thing he said, and the other thing you know is the other thing he said that's the complete opposite thing. Keir Starmer can't even say two things. There can't even be two things true about Keir Starmer without those two things contradicting each other. But the people who are planning to vote for Keir Starmer are voting for him because they are trusting that he's lying. They're assuming that he's lying, but they're assuming he's lying in a way that I guess conveniently means he's lying about all the things they don't like about him, and he's like gonna get in charge and suddenly become good or something. Like, I don't understand it. I don't understand how anyone can vote for a politician who there is no reason to think this guy is going to do anything good. There's no reason to think he's going to even avoid doing anything bad. For all we know, I mean, for everything we have a reason to know, he's going to get in charge and absolutely screw the country over, destroy it. Because if that wasn't his plan, why has he spent so long lying, right? Like, why has he spent so long saying, oh, my economic policy says, no, it's this, no, it's this, no, it's this, unless, like, what he's actually planning to do is the worst possible thing. If he had, like, a good plan, if he had, like, a plan that was like, yeah, here's my good idea, wouldn't he just tell everyone that plan and sell them on that plan? Rather than making up a whole load of different plans anytime he's interviewed, saying a different thing every couple of months, because he's making it up, and he doesn't have a good plan? But people are going to vote for him because they're like, well, he doesn't seem to have a plan because, he keeps saying all sorts of different plans. But actually, one time he said this one plan that I quite liked. So I'm going to vote for him and assume that he was being honest about the plans I liked. And every other time he said something completely differently, then he was lying, and that's fine. I don't get it. The European Football Championships things are going on right now. And I did want to end with a final point about the European Football Championships. Basically, for those who haven't been following, those of you traitors to this country, England aren't doing great. They're playing very badly. And I could make a whole point here about how I think there is a connection of fatalism that explains why it is that England do quite badly. Because England logically should not do badly in football. We are the country that football came from. We invented football. The Premier League is the best league in the world. That is, the English Premier League is the best football league in the world. The average English person likes football. And you can't even say like that it's to do with like economic factors or anything like that, because Germany, Netherlands, France, Spain and Italy to a lesser extent, they have all won World Cups, Euros recently. They do very well in terms of their performances most of the time. Now, occasionally they do have bad times. I think Italy had a time they didn't even qualify. Germany have been knocked out of the group stages a few times. But the point is that really, when you look at the fact that other countries have managed to do well, and then you think, surely England has every reason to want to do well, to actually invest in succeeding, and yet we don't. England consistently plays quite badly in a lot of European or just general footballing competitions. And I do think there is, I'm not going to get into it in mass detail, but I think there is something in the psychology of England and kind of by extension Britain, because most British people are English, that explains why it is that Britain, despite being a country that should be doing quite well politically, and I do think we are a country that has a lot of things going for us. There's no reason why we need to be in the state we're in. But I think we're doing pretty crap. And I think that's the same reason why there's no reason why England should be in the state it's in as a footballing country. And yet it's doing pretty crap. But the real thing that I wanted to say, because like I say, I'm not going to get into that whole reasoning I think there. I mean, the spoiler is I basically think it's to do with like a pessimism, pretty much, like a sense of an inability to recognize we should be doing better than we are. But the main issue I have is that England could still win these European championships. We could get lucky. Like, that's the thing about football, right? You can score a lucky goal here or there. You can have a lucky save every now and then. And of course, like I say, England should be doing a lot better. So actually, it's not that impossible that we could go all the way just based on even achieving a small fraction of what we should be able to achieve. But the thing there is that doesn't mean that the criticisms aren't valid. Like, even if we do, obviously I'll be happy if we win the European Championships, but I would still think, well, when you look, all the problems that we have, they're still there. The way we play football, the lack of initiative, the lack of drive, the conservationism where whenever we score a goal, we immediately retreat back into our own half and allow ourselves to be pressed, all the kind of just problems with the way England play football, they'll still be there, even if we happen to win the European Championships. And that's not necessarily something to celebrate because, well, we should win the European Championships. Like I say, there's every reason why England should be a great footballing nation. And in the exact same sense, I think it's possible that Keir Starmer will actually improve things for the UK. Like, I'm being really negative, but I'm going to slightly defend myself preemptively against what could be something that might make this a bit weird to look back on hindsight, which could be 5 years down the line, Keir Starmer has actually made the country a lot better than it is. That is a possibility. I mean, like I said, anything's a possibility because he lies about everything. For all I know, maybe he does have good policies. But I think what's more likely is not that he'll have good policies, but just that the country will do well. Because again, a lot of it is about luck. Like, who knows, maybe just things will happen to work out. Obviously, you know, there's things that can be very unlucky, like COVID happening, but sometimes things can get better. You know, like a lot of countries across the world experience periods of simultaneous economic booms, like in the 1990s. I think the mid to late 1990s, there was a big boom for the US, for the UK, for much of the Western developed world. It wasn't that all those countries suddenly started having really good, really competent governments. It's that there was a broad economic upswing. So maybe that will happen, and maybe that broad economic upswing will make Starmer look better. But it's also true that, like I say, the UK has no reason to be failing as a country. We have no excuse to be failing as a country. We've got lots of things. We've got a lot of soft power. A lot of people, like, if you may be watching this and you don't even speak English, or rather, you're not even from an English-speaking country, but you speak English because of the legacy of perhaps the British Empire directly, but if not, the British Empire indirectly through the influence of the United States. But certainly the UK has a lot of soft power to play with, even like a good amount of hard power to play with. Like at one point we were still a very small country, but we had like the world's largest navy. We could seriously, and you know, I don't really care about like military stuff and things like that. We used to be an economic superpower. There's no reason why those things can't be true now. So the point is that Keir Starmer may just simply by being able to access and kind of utilize a fraction of what the UK is actually capable of might prove to be one of our best prime ministers ever. But it's not because he's a good person. It's not because he's a genius. It's not because he's worthy of being prime minister. He's not worthy of being prime minister. Just based on everything he's done so far, he's not worthy. Because if you lie like that, if you're dishonest like that, if you show yourself to be that kind of person, you're not worthy to lead a country. You're not worthy to be the most powerful person in a country and one of the most powerful people in the world. But yeah, he might do all right, right? Because sometimes people get lucky. And if you're in charge of a country that has a decent track record of actually being pretty powerful, pretty successful, pretty prosperous, yeah, you're in an okay position to find yourself somehow failing upwards, which you might manage. But no matter what, I'll still hate him. So yeah, 5 years time, if he still, I almost honestly wouldn't even be surprised if he somehow like doesn't manage to make it the full 5 years. But yeah, if it turns out that he actually did better, you don't get to tell me I was wrong. Because I'm saying he could make things go well, but I'm guaranteeing if he makes things better for this country, it's not because of any conspicuous talent he has. No. Anyway, thanks for watching, everyone. Remember, just, yeah, don't vote Labour, Conservative or Liberal. Like, why would you? Why would you? Like, you know what they're doing to this country. I don't get it. Vote Reform. Vote Green. There's a party standing where I live. It's called the Heritage Party. They seem like a crazy bunch of right-wing neo-fascist lunatics. But you know what? Like, at least if you vote for them, you're sending a message to the establishment. That's like the main thing, right? This is an opportunity to send a message. Chances are Keir Starmer's going to win no matter what. Chances are Labour's going to win. It's very unlikely they won't. So why would you not take the opportunity to send a message? Like any message. Women's Party UK, or whatever it's called. Party of Women. I think there's already something called the Women's Party. That's got to be kind of annoying. Because it's kind of annoying to say Party of Women every single time. Anyway, bye.